Hello, I'm Ross Brawn, and you're listening to Beyond the Grid.
Hi everyone, Happy New Year. It's Tom Clarkson here with the first of two very special episodes of Beyond the Grid, presented by Bose Quiet Comfort 35.2 wireless headphones. Now, January the 3rd is Michael Schumacher's 50th birthday. That makes him the same age as Will Smith, Hugh Jackman, Kylie Minogue and Daniel Craig. But only Michael can claim to be the most successful driver in the history of Formula One. His astonishing 7 world titles and 91 victories are still some way clear of Lewis Hamilton in second place. Michael, of course, retired from F1 for a second time in 2012, but very sadly we haven't heard from him since his skiing accident in December 2013, and it goes without saying that he remains in the hearts and minds of F1 fans all over the world, and he's very much in the thoughts of my guest today, Ross Brawn. Ross played a central role in all of Michael's world title successes and all but 3 of his race wins. He was technical director at Benetton and then Ferrari, and he even lured Michael out of retirement in 2010 when Mercedes returned to F1 as a works entity. Few people know Michael better than Ross, so who better to reflect on this prodigious talent? Please sit back and enjoy some of his reflections on a very special driver. Well, Ross, welcome to Beyond the Grid. Great to have you on the show. We're talking all things Michael Schumacher. It's his 50th birthday. So when did you first meet Michael, and what impression did he make on you?
I met Michael in sports car racing in the mid-80s, late last third of the 80s. Would have been 88 or 89, I guess. And he, maybe even 90 actually, but he was driving for the Mercedes sports car team. They had 3 drivers. I think it was Michael, Frentzen and Wendlinger, which all obviously went on to have Formula One careers. But in the sports cars, Michael stood out massively. And sports cars were about going quick, but also driving to fuel, driving semi-economy run during the race. But he was doing lap times on less fuel than the others, beating them by a mile. And the year we had the championship-winning Jaguar, the only opposition we truly had, quite frankly, was Michael in the Mercedes, because the other drivers weren't anywhere near as good. And we were saved a little bit by the fact that the Mercedes management gave each of their drivers an equal stint in the car. So Michael would go out and give us all sorts of grief, and then the other 2 would give us some comfort. That's where I first met him. And clearly incredibly quick. And what impressed me was his ability to do the fuel mileage with lap time. And very competitive in those days. He had a fairly major altercation with Derek Warwick, where I had to help stand between the 2 before Derek whacked him. Michael, something happened in qualifying, and both cars came in the pits with big marks down the side, and Derek tore out the car and chased Michael up the pit lane with myself and some Mercedes mechanics trying to keep up and stop Derek hitting him.
So was it obvious to you, even then in sports cars, that he had a Formula One future and a successful one at that?
You don't know when you make that transition, but clearly he was exceptional in sports cars. So it was obvious to Tom Walkinshaw and myself how good he was. And when the talk came of him going into Formula One, Tom and I were already then engaged at Benetton. And we were desperate to get him in the car because we knew how good he was.
You were desperate to get him in the car. Are we talking after Belgium when he made his debut with Eddie Jordan, or were you in contact with him about Formula One prior to that?
Prior to that, I think as soon as we became aware, I mean, the problem was we had 2 drivers in the car, and it wasn't Jordan had a spare seat, and we were trying to persuade Flavio that we should be fairly drastic in the change. He wasn't convinced because he knew nothing about Michael Schumacher. But of course, when Michael appeared in Spa and put in the performance he did, he was convinced. So I think the Flavio discovering Michael Schumacher story is a little bit exaggerated. Tom and I were desperate to get him in the car, and Flavio was convinced once he saw him at Spa. So then ensued a sort of fairly testy battle to pull him out of the Jordan and stick him in the Benetton.
Did he personally get involved in those negotiations, or was he just the pawn in the middle that you were all fighting over?
I don't think you'd ever describe Michael as a pawn. I certainly wouldn't. He's.
But even back then, actually, he was.
Oh, he's sharp, and he would have known everything that was going on. But Willy Weber was the key guy on Michael's side. But in fact, Mercedes were helping fund his Formula One introduction. So I remember some of the Mercedes guys were involved in the discussions. But quite frankly, that was something Tom and Flavio did. I watched as entertained from a distance. I was more concerned, or only concerned really, with the engineering of the car.
Now, what was he like as a person back then, Ross? Was he very confident immediately, or was there a sort of humbleness to him at that point? Or just what did you find when he first came to Benetton and the Italian Grand Prix of 1991?
He was pretty well balanced, I must say. He had enough confidence to make you feel he could do the job, but not overconfident. Very very inquisitive, very keen to learn. And I remember even then, he devoted himself to it and committed the time, and just came across immediately as a very professional driver. Not an awful lot of experience, because his experience had been quite narrow in what he'd done. So there was a lot of learning to do, but he had a great attitude. I think one of the things I'd say about Michael throughout his career is that people who worked with him never had a bad word to say about him. Within the teams he worked in, he always created a great impression and great loyalty. And it was immediately obvious back then. The following year we had a delicate situation because Martin Brundle was his partner. And Martin was someone who was very close to Tom. And there was a little bit of minor needle in the team, but nothing too serious. So that had to be sort of managed. But and Michael handled himself pretty well. So he was. I'm trying to remember how old he would have been at that stage. That would have been 91. So we ought to be able to work this out, but I'm getting too old. He would have been in what is.
He would have been 23.
Yeah.
So okay. Young.
I'll take your word for it.
So he was. So he was born in '68 because we're celebrating his.
Yeah, well, it was 25 then. 23. 91, yeah. He was 23.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
What about Nelson Piquet? Because that first race for you guys at Benetton, he had a 3-time world champion alongside him and beat him immediately. Can you remember how they rubbed along together?
I didn't really. I mean, Nelson made a big fuss about dropping of... I'm trying to remember who the Benetton rival was. That
Roberto Moreno.
Moreno, yes. Moreno got dropped, and Nelson made a big fuss about that and sort of was creating a big sideshow about Moreno being unceremoniously dropped. Like all drivers of Nelson's sort of experience, he had Moreno in the place he wanted him, and then suddenly he had this young kid who wasn't interested in what Nelson wanted. So I think and Nelson left. I think the writing was on the wall, and Nelson knew which way the team was going to be going. So, you don't. It's a cruel world in that environment. You don't choose your direction's chosen by the people that are in the team. In the sense that, if Michael was faster and was young and was the prospect, you show all the respect you can to the drivers you have, but you follow the main lead. You can't help it. So I think Nelson knew that even though he'd had a good relationship with the team, that his time was over. So, and I think Nelson had vast experience. I think probably, I can't remember the details, but I imagine that that last part of that season, Nelson probably pulled pulled one over Michael a few times from his experience, but I think you could see on sheer performance he was going to be in trouble.
Ross, I guess, is there a case of what goes around comes around? Because fast forward to 2012, Mercedes, you had the opportunity to get hold of Lewis Hamilton, and Michael was in the Nelson Piquet role in a way, I suppose.
You could make that comparison. I think probably I would say that that Michael was kept very much in that loop of what was going on. I think the thing that was explained to Michael, and I know I explained to Michael, was that Lewis was coming to the end of his contract, and there was a window that he was going to be available in. And if he became available, then Mercedes would try and go for him, because he was the future and Michael was coming to the end of his career. So, and Michael understood that and respected that, and as long as it was done openly and in a straightforward manner, he dealt with it. So, I think probably in that instance, I'd like to think that Michael was kept very much more involved and in the loop than probably with Nelson, who had nothing to do or was didn't have much say in what was going on. And I think from memory, Flavio tried to keep Nelson, but it was clear Nelson was not going to hang around when Michael turned up.
Now, you worked directly with Michael for 21 years, 1991 to 2012. When was he at his peak? I think those Ferrari years in the early 2000s. We were fairly dominant, but he was winning races sometimes he shouldn't have won, and he just had a majesty about him that in that period that was impressive to watch. And his speed, his consistency, his work ethic with the team. That was a pretty special period. But when you talk about a peak, you're talking about a guy who was at the pinnacle for most of that time. You're comparing extremely high level of performance in all the years. 94, he was, when he won the first championship, he was incredible. We had a very good car, but he was just exceptional in 94. I think it's difficult to define a peak because he was he flatlined in a sense, but flatlined at a level that was so high that it's difficult to pick out the. I think that one of the things that impressed me with probably Michael's career was 2000 and let me get this right, I'm bad on years. 2005, 2006, which were the where did he finish in five? Well, in 2005 he was third.
Yeah, and six
he was second.
Yeah. Well, those are the years when we got done by the tyre decision. So we developed a car which was with Bridgestone, which was small fuel tank, multi-stop, nimble on our feet, lots of pit stops, had that all off to a T. And, of course, that was part of the sort of dominating package. And then at the end of 2004, the FIA and Bernie decided to introduce a rule where you had to race on one set of tyres the whole race, which completely screwed the philosophy of the Ferrari at the time, and completely screwed the philosophy of Bridgestone tyres, which were high grip, high degradation, but fantastic performance. And the properties of a Michelin were much better. So we went from dominating and winning championships to suddenly getting lapped by cars that we wouldn't have seen the year before. And I think Michael's resolve and the way he kept his head down in that period was a tribute to him. He didn't throw the toys out the pram. He kept his head down, worked hard, and we almost won it in 2006. There was a couple of instances near the end of the season that lost us a championship, but we were certainly contenders from a position when these rules changed to being pretty. It was embarrassing when we started because we just didn't have a tyre that would last the whole race, so we were having to cruise around to make the best of it. And you couldn't wear the tyres out and change. You had to, unless the tyre punctured or failed, you were not supposed to change tyres. It was a odd rule really, but just done purely to screw Ferrari.
Did he dwell on disappointments?
Not really. I think my family knew when not to talk to me when I came home after a race if it had gone badly. And I think everyone who's involved in Formula One feels that. But, we'd have a bad race. By about the Tuesday or Wednesday, we'd be on the phone talking about it and working out what we were going to do. Sometimes it would be something which, you dealt with on a Monday morning. Sometimes it's something you had to just cool down for a while, depending on what the issue was. But no, he was always as constructive as you could be about resolving issues and fixing them and moving on. And one of his great strengths was he always dealt with those issues behind closed doors. He very rarely, I can't recall, ever him really complaining outside of the team. He might get upset about something or other that people saw, but he never went to the media and used the media to complain about something the team was doing or something he was unhappy about. He was always very defensive and supportive of his team because that's the way he felt. Could get pretty feisty behind closed doors, but that was how it should have been.
Did he have direction from someone like you, or did that all come naturally to him, to keep everything behind closed doors?
I think we all learned together. I mean, one of the reasons I think our friendship grew is that we were both, our careers in Formula One were sort of maturing and accelerating about the same time. I mean, I'd been in Formula One for 10, 15 years, maybe longer. By the time I got to work with Michael. But that level of responsibility I had at Benetton was the biggest team I'd been in and the highest level of responsibility I'd been in. So, I was learning as I went along, and so was he. So, he's 14 years younger than me, but we were both on this path of trying to achieve success in Formula One. I think we were both learning from each other. I had a bit more experience, but I'd not been that close to the responsibilities I had then before. So, the level of responsibility I had at Benetton for the size of team I had at Benetton was a new thing for me, and so that we were both on a learning curve in different ways, and I think both supported each other and both trusted each other, which was another key element.
Well, I was going to say, what was the glue that kept you two in particular together for such a long period of time?
I think after a while we just learned to read each other, when to talk, when not to talk, when to push, when to hold back. And like any relationship that evolves and develops and matures, the right time to encourage and the right time to criticize and the right time to hold back. And that was something which developed with Michael. And so, I had a principle, for instance, of never really, I don't recall ever telling him how to drive a car. I'd make the information available that he could draw conclusions. But I had no idea how to drive a racing car. I could see from the data analysis and various other things where it was working, where it wasn't working. But I had no experience of going into a corner at the speeds that those guys were doing. And Michael often, you could see comparing him to other drivers, he would have more of a tendency to go into a corner and see what was there and cope with it when he found it. Is
that what made him so good in the wet?
Probably, yeah. Just the sheer belief in his own ability that whatever was going to happen, I mean, it has boundaries, of course. You can't just go charging into a corner at ridiculous speed and hope you're going to catch it up. But he would just have that extra degree of faith that his ability was going to carry him through. And I don't really know how you describe it, but that was always my feeling with him, that his corner entry speed was always higher, always had a bit more confidence. And in fact, helping him understand the ways of getting the best time out of the car was an important thing. And Michael always had very close relationships with his engineers. He started with Pat Simmons at Benetton, Andrea Stella, a couple of different guys at Ferrari. He always had a very intimate relationship with his engineers because he spent so much time with them. And those were the guys who would actually have more affinity and more feel for what the car was doing and describe it to him and discuss it with him. And they were the two. There was generally a three-person team. There'd be Michael, a race engineer, and what we call the vehicalisti. And he was the vehicalisti. I remember Andrea Stella used to do that for Michael, and he would do all the data analysis. So the three of them would be quite a strong entity, and working out how to get the best out of the car, what the best way of driving it was, what needed to change, etc., etc. And that commitment, that devotion to that process was one of the other strengths that Michael had.
You talk about devotion, so his work ethic, was that unlike any other driver you experienced?
Yes, yeah, I think I've worked with some pretty professional drivers, and I think, if you take someone like Martin Brundle, Martin was extremely committed, and I don't think you would say that Martin worked any less hard than Michael. But there were a lot of other drivers who definitely didn't get it.
Are you going to mention any names?
Well, Johnny, bless his cotton socks, was... I remember the first time I went up into a debrief with Johnny, and he was playing Nintendo or something on a little machine, and it was his way of relaxing. I kind of understood that, but I was a bit shocked because I expected to go up there and see him deep in discussion with his engineer, and I went up to the debrief bus, and Johnny was playing his Nintendo, and that was his way of kind of, I don't know, coming down or dealing with it. And that wasn't what I was used to, because, I'd go up to the bus and I'd see Michael in the huddle with his couple of guys working out what had happened, what was doing. It'd be something he'd be puzzled by or something he wanted to work on. I had to get, there's one or two other guys, I had to get into that approach, that philosophy that was needed. You see, and it did change, because you take a guy like Eddie Irvine. Eddie was very, relaxed to his approach, but when he saw what Michael was doing and what he had to, Eddie changed and became much more professional in the sort of, shadow of Michael, or the mirroring of Michael, in that, you look at this guy and you see what he's putting into it. You think, well, if I'm going to get close to him, I've got to start knuckling down.
Now, you've already said that, you had a great job at Benetton, you were the top technical guy. Was it inevitable that you were going to follow Schumacher to Ferrari, or were you tempted to stay put?
Initially, I was definitely going to stay put. I had no intent to go to Ferrari. In fact, probably that was one of the most difficult periods of mine and Michael's relationship, because Michael had a little bit of behind-the-scenes fallout with the senior management of Benetton over his contract, which he told me about. And he was unhappy about one or two things that had happened. And then he came to see me during the 95 season and said, I'm moving. And at that stage, there was a very brief discussion about whether I would go with him or not. But I think I didn't want to at that stage, and I think, well, there was no room for me. I mean, Michael was going to the Ferrari team with John Barnard, and they were very committed to the John Barnard approach and route, and they'd set John up in the new facility and so on and so forth. So I don't think any of our thoughts were for me to do that as well.
Did you feel let down by Michael? Because he just won 2 world championships on the bounce for you guys. Probably would have won in 96 had he stayed, maybe?
Yeah, he would have. I think he would have won in 96. We had a good car in 96. And
were you surprised that he went?
I was a bit. And I say that's probably one of the most difficult times of our relationship, because he'd made that move, and I was very committed and devoted to Benetton and the people that were there. I was in the middle of I wouldn't say a crisis at Benetton, but I felt I knew what Benetton had to do next to really to get onto another level. And Formula One is a pretty engineering-led organisation. And I'd gone to Benetton in the position I had a senior position, but I wasn't in charge, totally in charge. I was in charge of some of it, but not all of it. And I had a vision for where the team could go in the future. And that vision seemed to be shared by Flavio and the Benetton family. But when it actually came down to making the changes that were needed, they wouldn't back me. They said they were going to, and then it didn't happen. And so during the year, I became a bit disillusioned, because the promises had been made to me as part of we're going to revitalise this team. Okay, we're losing Michael, but we're going to take the team to another level. And it involved investment, involved restructuring of the company, involved various things. Just wasn't happening. And I was getting blanked whenever I raised the topic that we were supposed to be doing this. And then about the middle of the year, I think Michael had discovered a different situation at Ferrari than he anticipated on the engineering side, and wanted to introduce what we had at Benetton, but that wasn't John's way of doing things. And so about the middle of the year, I got a call saying, "Would you like to have a chat?" Willie Webber called me and said, "Michael's asked me to call you, Jean Todd's asked me to call you. Would you sit down with Jean and just discuss things?" And I knew Jean from sports car days, because Jean ran the Peugeot team, so we knew each other quite well. And I was just at the right point of getting frustrated with Benetton having been made promises over the winter that were not happening. So I went along and I was tempted, and we started working on a deal. And I think about September time, everything was in place, and I told Benetton that I was leaving. They clearly didn't see things as I saw them. Of course, there was a bit of a reaction and a panic, and it got awkward for a few weeks. But then eventually they recognised that there was no point in standing in my way, and they released me, and I went to Ferrari. So that's how it happened.
So when you were at Ferrari, I mean, well, Michael had already had the disappointment of 96. He won a few races, but 96, 97, 98, 99. 4 missed years as far as you guys were concerned. How did you all deal with the disappointment of that? And what was the pressure like? Because Ferrari hadn't won a championship since 79 with Scheckter.
They hadn't. The only thing I'd say is I think we were second.
First to the losers, or how did you view?
Yeah, first to the losers. That's true.
But I mean, how did you view finishing second? Was it even more frustrating?
Oh, it was gut wrenching. But on reflection, it probably bonded the team more strongly together than might have been. I'm not saying we wouldn't have welcomed winning those championships, but I think it pulled the team closer together. I mean, we lost championships literally at the last race of those 3 years. 97, 98, 99. 96, obviously, I wasn't that involved. But 97, we modified John's car and had a run at it. 98, we got very close. 99, Michael broke his leg when he would have won the championship quite easily. I mean, Eddie almost won it, and Michael was on the road to dominating that one until the accident. So,
can I ask you a question about Eddie? Had he won that championship in 99, how would that have gone down within Ferrari?
Probably mixed, if I'm honest, because there was a feeling that Michael was the one who would have deserved it quite clearly, but we would have taken it, and I think there was big effort made to try and get Eddie over the line on that. And, he got a bit wobbly at the end. I think when the pressure really came on, he struggled to handle it because, we had a good car that year. We were backing him every way we could. I mean, Mika Sala gave up a race win to Eddie. Michael gave up a race win to Eddie when he came back. So there was every opportunity for Eddie to make it. But I think deep down, everyone thought Michael was the one who deserved it. But we wouldn't have said no, because you never do. We won the Constructors that year, which was, for teams is an important thing, but felt a little bit of a consolation prize.
So can you just describe the sense of relief that you had at the end of 2000 when finally it all came together?
Yeah, I think that's why you can look back on it now with a sort of rose-tinted spectacles and say how great 2000 was, because we were so painful. It was so painful in the 3 previous years. It was stunning for us to win it in 2000, and it was a strong championship. I mean, we had to fight incredibly hard in 2000 to win it. It wasn't a cruise, that's for sure. And I think it was Japan, wasn't it, that we sealed it. And I remember there was a lot of race strategy involved. We were racing with Mika, and both enjoyable and stressful thing in that period was on the pit wall. You were very involved in the race. You could make or break the race very easily. You needed the driver to deliver for sure, and that was one of the things Michael was great at. But you could screw the race if you got it wrong, and so you're mapping out what you thought. And I think we made some good strategic decisions in that race. And I remember the last pit stop where Michael came out in front of Mika, and we had to get it to the end, but there was a fair bit of elation when we did that. And I remember poor old Mika asking what the hell had happened, because he thought he was on top of it. I think we just kept our powder dry until we had a window of opportunity, and as always, Michael nailed it at the crucial time, and that was it.
Don't worry, listeners, I won't interrupt the interview for long, as I know you'll be keen to hear more incredible stories and insight from Ross in just a moment, and there's plenty of that coming up in part 2. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Michael Schumacher in honour of his 50th birthday. So, tweet me at Tom Clarkson F1 or use the F1 Beyond the Grid hashtag and let us know what Michael means to you. 2019 is set to be an action-packed year in Formula One. Can Lewis Hamilton make it 6 world titles? Can Ferrari beat him and Mercedes? And how will Red Bull Honda get on? So much to look forward to. And after a much-needed break, we're back and ready to take on whatever the year throws at us. It's noise off, focus on, as we continue to keep our Bose Quiet Comfort 35.2 wireless headphones close to hand to help us knuckle down and zone in on our work so we can ensure that we keep you entertained and enlightened with the guests we've got coming up this season. Go to Bose.com to find out more about the QC35-2s, where you'll find more information about the benefits of their 20 hours of battery life and how at the click of a button you can change the amount of noise cancelling to fit your environment. Meaning that when you're at home or in the office, you get the same consistent sound quality as you do on a busy, noisy street. And if you're an Amazon Alexa or Google Assistant user, then you'll be pleased to know that the QC35-2s have been refined to give you direct access to both. Again, all accessible by just the click of a button. Speaking of which, I better press stop on this recording and let us get back to Ross. That's a good point as well, isn't it? Because how much easier was your life on the pit wall having Michael in the car as opposed to another driver? I point at, I think, Hungary 98 as one example, where you had him make up, I think, 25 seconds in 19 laps.
Yeah.
And put him on a 3-stop, and you beat both of the McLarens. Could you have done that kind of thing with any other driver?
There will be drivers who could do that, but Michael was exceptional because he had the ability to do that. He enjoyed doing it. Nothing turned him on more than doing it. And he understood it all. He would spend the time with us, with the models, with the strategy. He'd spend quite a lot of time with me, and as the strategy became more involving the people that were helping put the strategy together, he would spend a lot of time with them, understanding every nuance of what was going to happen and how it might happen and what his key areas of the race would be. And it was a chess game in that there were periods where you didn't make the strongest moves. You were just putting yourself in the right place to make the strong moves when the opportunity came. So, and he understood all of that. So we'd still get done sometimes. We'd still get shocks. He would be the one asking me what the hell had happened. But it was a very thrilling part of the racing in those periods. I mean, now the strategy is almost autonomous. It's because we haven't got the refueling and you haven't got the fuel weights taken into consideration. Then there's an undercut or something. But being faster at the end of a stint with no fuel and old tyres was quite feasible compared to being out there on high fuel with new tyres. That was the crucial thing. Whereas now, unless depending on the state of the tyres, it's pretty rare that you'll be faster at the end of a stint, depending on tyres. But very rare you'll be faster at the end of a stint than you will be at the beginning of the next one because you've got the same fuel weight. So it's a different scenario.
Now, talk to me about what I call the juggernaut years, when you guys were unstoppable, so 2000 through to 2004. Did you guys ever, this might seem an odd question, but did you ever feel guilty about the extent of your dominance?
No, and I think because we'd paid the price for those, particularly those 3 years. I mean, we'd all been in business quite a long time. And those 3 years of agony at the last race, we didn't have any issues about the. And I think 2004 was pretty dominant, but they were all generally. If you look at them, it wasn't like now where the top 3 teams are lapping everyone else and sort of disappearing. We didn't do that. We always seemed to have someone nibbling at our heels, keeping us as honest as we needed to be, and we had some. Quite a hard-fought championship some of those years. So, but it was a well-oiled machine. Rory was doing a fantastic job designing the cars, and because the way we worked, almost as soon as he got one done, I'd get him off on the next one and leave the race team to develop the car and the race team to run the car. And we'd get the car. At the beginning of the year, we'd get the car running, get it settled, work it out. There'd be a development program agreed, and then Rory would start to be thinking about the next car. And when you get in that motion, you get in that rhythm, then it's very strong. And great team mechanics led by Nigel Stepney, who was doing a fantastic job. Stefano running the team was doing, every element of the team was working well and very united and very. A very homogenous team. Is that the word? Very together and very together group.
Did you sense that Michael's hunger dimmed at any point? By the time he'd knocked up 7 world championships and 91 victories, did you feel him ease off at all, or was the hunger there like it was his first race win?
I mean, I never. And I suppose I'm as guilty as he was in a way, in that I left Ferrari after 10 years, and I decided that after 10 years was a great time. Every year had been fabulous, and I never regretted a single year, but I almost wanted it to stay that way, and I decided 10 years was a nice round number. Now, how illogical is that to an engineer? I mean, you're going to stop work at Ferrari after 10 years because it's a nice round number. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but it just felt like I had a great time, and I was nervous of it. I had to take a step down at some stage. We'd had couple of tough years, but we'd come out of it. We'd got on top of it, and in fact the team won the championship in 2007. So with the car that was designed while I was still there, and the program that was only just, but they did. And 2006 we almost won it again. So I was pretty pleased with where the team was. And Michael just said to me that he was tired. He was hankering after being able to do other things that he couldn't do with the level of commitment and devotion that he needed to give Formula One. He was never a guy who was going to do a half-hearted job. So he knew the levels of commitment that he would want to give to the project. He just decided he didn't want to make that commitment anymore. He was tired and he wanted to have some time to himself. And that was as much of an explanation as he gave me for stopping.
So what changed, fast forward to 2010, when he came back with you at Mercedes?
Well, I think he'd rested.
Okay.
I think
he'd scratched a few itches.
Yeah, he'd had those years of sort of doing the various things he wanted to do.
Fallen off a few motorbikes, didn't he?
There was that as well, yeah. Which, he'd done the things that he wanted to do. And I understand that, because I've kind of done the same. I've had 3 years of retirement before coming back to this role. And in a way you miss the structure and the rhythm of the job, the life, the challenges. I had a pretty busy 3 years of retirement doing various things. In fact, Jean reckons she saw less of me when I was retired than when I was working, but at a different pace. And that's the thing I discovered, that retirement, everything I did at my own pace. This business drives you at a different speed, and so it can be addictive. It can be very appealing. And I think he found the same, that he'd had, his 3 years or whatever, 4 years of just running his own life at whatever pace he wanted to. And, he missed perhaps the discipline and the pace of Formula One.
Who made the first move for 2010?
Well, what happened, if you remember, because of Felipe's accident, Michael tried to get back in the car, and that kind of alerted me to the fact that he was starting to get withdrawal symptoms. He'd had his bike accident, and he'd hurt his neck quite badly, much more than people probably appreciated, because he kept it quite quiet, and he couldn't drive. Eventually he had to admit he couldn't drive the car when they tried to get him in the Ferrari. His neck was just giving him too much grief. So but it showed to me that he was keen. He certainly wasn't crossing it off. And when, quite frankly, we were caught off balance by Jensen deciding to leave, I rang him up and said, "Do you fancy a beer?" And he said, "I know what you want to ask. Let's have one."
He knew why you were making that call.
Yeah. I mean, he kept his finger on the pulse, and so it was no shock to him. And in fact, we agreed to try and find a way forward very quickly, and Mercedes were very keen to have him in the car. Of course, Norbert was very keen to get him in the car. So then it was just a question of working out a deal that everybody could live with. So it came together fairly quickly.
Was Willy Weber still involved at that point, or was Michael doing most of the deals himself?
No, Michael had moved on since then. So
working with Sabine Kem?
Yeah, and really looking after himself by that stage. I mean, I don't think he needed Willy in the years he was retired, so he didn't reconnect. From my recollection, I think that was the case.
Had he learned quite a lot of Willy in terms of doing a deal, being demanding?
It wasn't a difficult deal, to be honest.
Right.
No, it was pretty straightforward. I mean, it was a very straightforward arrangement. So.
Well, what about Michael, the driver, then? Was he the same? Could you see immediately he was the same driver that he'd been in 2006?
Many ways. I think the difference was that we no longer had a dominant car. I mean, in those periods of Ferrari, we always had a strong car or the strongest car. And the reality was we didn't have it in 2010. The team had been in survival mode because we simply didn't know where we were going, and we couldn't commit the budget to putting in a strong development program for 2010 because we were basically, we were keeping a close eye on every expenditure because we thought we may have to survive another year with no major. And it was a sign of the times at that period that we won the World Championship, but we still didn't have a major sponsor. We were the fairy story of that year, but we still didn't have a major sponsor. It was a pretty tough economic environment at that stage. So we went into 2010 with a gently warmed up version of what we had in 2009 rather than making the level of progress. And of course, new regulations in 9, other teams got on top of them more quickly than we did. So in 2010, we were pretty average.
How much of a frustration was that for all of you, having to sort of reset your goals, I suppose?
It was, and but what was interesting in that period, and in fact, I remember Andrew Shovlin talking to me after they won the first 1 or 2 of their World Championships again, how much he felt that Michael had contributed to that success, in that Michael had helped to instill and reinforce the principles of how to do things, and in that period, because I'd worked with Michael, I knew what he was like, I knew the standards he maintained, and I knew the levels he worked to. Those guys hadn't, and so Michael came in. I mean, it's a funny story. I mean, Jock Clear, who was Villeneuve's engineer when Michael and Villeneuve came together, almost hated Michael with a passion. Yet became one of Michael's closest friends when Michael came to the team and worked with him. And Michael's work ethic and discipline and application just won everyone over, and it raised the standard of the team in knowing what they could or should be doing. I mean, I think I had an impact, but Michael had just as much or even more impact on the team when he came and worked there. So they,
How interesting.
Andrew Shovlin said to me, especially when they won their first World Championship, and I was talking to him about it, and he said, this one, Michael had an awful lot to do with us winning this championship. So
now, Ross, you touched on Jerez 97 there, talking about Jock, but also there were a few blemishes, and Adelaide 94 with Damon Hill.
Hiccups.
Is that what we... But did he... And then with Monaco 2006 in qualifying as well, when he parked the car. How did Michael explain those 3 moments in particular to you?
Well, the Villeneuve incident was fascinating because when he came back to the pits, he was convinced Villeneuve was a villain, and it wasn't.
Villeneuve had wronged him. Yeah,
so he came back to the pit screaming, "We had to get Villeneuve disqualified. He'd driven into him. And then we showed it to him on the video, and he was shocked, genuinely shocked. I mean, in his own mind, Villeneuve had hit him. He hadn't hit Villeneuve. And, I don't know how you describe it. It was a kind of a reaction he had. That, there was so much pressure. This was a championship that he could win. And that was a race where he'd become particularly frustrated because I can't criticize him because we probably invented the game, but Frentzen had been messing about with Michael for a lot of the race as a sort of foil of Williams, and was screwing Michael's race up. And Michael was quicker, I think, than Villeneuve. And there was a lot of complexity in that race that was going on, and it all kind of surfaced in this blip, this aberration that he had. And as I say, he came back to the pit screaming blue murder about Villeneuve and the way he'd driven. And it wasn't until he looked at it that he went very quiet and realised that it hadn't, what we'd seen was not what he perceived in the cockpit had happened. I think Monaco was a stupid move. I don't really understand Monaco because my only frustration with Monaco is we knew we probably wouldn't be on pole, but we had such a fast car and we had a great strategy we'd sort of worked out of what we were going to do that we would have won the race. And where I kicked myself is I should have made that even clearer to him that there was not the pressure on pole position that there might have been. And so I'm not... He did something he shouldn't have done, and there was no doubt about it, and I don't think he ever had an excuse for it. But, in a career spanning how many years? 20 odd years?
306 races.
306 races. You've mentioned 3 incidents.
Yeah.
He's pretty tough the rest of the time, don't get me wrong, but 3 instances, that's a 1% aberration rate when you're in the spotlight every race. So there you go.
How tough was it for him, do you think, after Monaco in particular? Because his peers, the other drivers, came down pretty hard on him, didn't they? I remember Alonso was very outspoken. Webber too, I think, Mark Webber.
I think he had various people that he respected, in various people he didn't pay much attention to. That was all part of the defence mechanism of being a sort of frontline Formula 1 driver. So there were definitely people. I mean, I remember Mika Hakkinen, he always had a lot of time for you, huge respect for him. I think when you're out on the circuit, we don't really appreciate it, but when you're out on the circuit and you're seeing what people do and you're seeing the little moves they make and the little twitches they make and the way they drive and the ability, you'd sometimes hear, any driver would come in and say, so-and-so is a tosser because I've watched him out on the circuit and he hasn't taken that corner twice to say in 2 laps. And, they'd have opinions of each other. And they'd have opinions of who would be a good driver, who they would respected and who they admired. So I think a lot depended on who it was and saying what. I think when Mika had things to say about Michael, he always said them to Michael privately. And I think that had quite an impact on Michael when it happened. And that was, Mika was both very honourable in a sense, but also very smart in the way he did things, because if he had something to say to Michael, he'd go and tell him privately. And that had, Michael respected him, and it had much bigger impact than someone, jawing away in the press about it. So it must have had some impact on him, but I never got the impression that it was, he just saw that as part of the battle.
You don't think he was an inherently dirty driver?
Well, it depends what you mean by dirty.
Only the reason I'm thinking of that is Mika, Spa 2000, he eventually got past using, was it Ricardo Zonta, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And but the lap before, Michael had him on the grass, I think, going up to Lake Horn. But
Michael took no prisoners.
Yeah.
But he rarely complained about anyone else either. I mean, I just mentioned the Villeneuve thing, but that was, I say, more of an aberration. But he rarely whinged or moaned about someone else being tough on him. If someone else he didn't get him on the radio that often saying, so-and-so's done this, or he moved on the braking, or he did that, he shouldn't be doing. It was kind of live by the sword, die by the sword type of thing that everyone will know if they want to get past me, they're going to have to do a special job. And I think that's all part of the sort of vernacular of being a racing driver, certainly a top-line racing driver. So,
was your relationship with him strictly professional? Did you guys hang out away from the racetrack? Were you with the families?
Not a huge amount. Special occasions, my birthdays, his birthdays, anniversaries. I always, we as a family always like to have celebrate special occasions. So I remember my 40th, which was 94. He came to my party in the UK, wedding anniversaries. He loved, we went to some of his parties, and he loved to, they were always fancy dress. he loved dressing up. So they were always fairly glamorous, fancy dress parties, and he'd always be in a pretty flamboyant outfit. So, and they were lively parties, I must say.
Did you sense he was the same guy? Was he a different guy away from the racetrack, away from the pressure of?
He was
Formula One.
He was a very well balanced guy away from the racetrack. I mean, he never lauded the "I'm Michael Schumacher." Do you know who I am? I never ever saw that in him. He liked to have a bit of protection because obviously he loved America because really no one knew him there, and he liked to spend time in America because that gave him the privacy and freedom that he hankered over. Because you saw him in Europe or in any of the places where he was recognised, and he couldn't move. So there was that was an element of his. But I'd gone meet him at the house, and Corinna would be there, the dogs would be there, the kids would be there, and he'd lounge around the pool for half a day, or it was all very relaxed. He never lauded it. He had good, nice standards, regards to the family and regards to the way he led his life.
So, actually, just before we talk about legacy, there's one other thing. Was he superstitious? Do you remember when he came to Mercedes and there was the whole thing about changing his race number?
He did have...
Wasn't it? He was meant to be 4 and Rosberg was 3, but he wanted odd numbers or something?
He was always superstitious about odd numbers. His chassis numbers had to be odd numbers. And we used to change the chassis plates around because it was never the most convenient thing to give him a specific chassis. So the chassis plates were movable for that reason.
He knew you were doing that, did he?
Probably, yeah. But it didn't matter to him as long as the chassis was called number 3 or called number 7 or whatever it was. So he had a thing about odd numbers. That was the only thing I really recall that was a bit of a thing for him. But,
so the legacy of Michael Schumacher, he's 50 years young. How would you describe his legacy?
I think he set just completely new standards in Formula One. New standards in terms of fitness, preparation, the level of commitment that drivers needed to give. Just take a small example, his fitness. He just raised the bar so much in that respect. And it's interesting, I know difficult to compare the cars physically now with the physical effort to drive a car now compared to what they used to be, but he would finish a race and he wouldn't be sweating and he would be leaping around the rostrum, and you looked at the other 2 drivers on the rostrum and they'd be fatigued, barely able to lift the trophy, and they kind of looked at this guy and thought, this is supernatural. And he raised that standard, and it's now normal. I mean, if you look at all the young guys, look at any driver in Formula One, their levels of fitness are impressive. And he was, to my mind, probably the first one who attained those levels of fitness.
More so than Senna?
Yeah. I think Ayrton was a huge, very special driver, but I saw him fatigued. I never saw Michael tired. Can't remember an occasion when he finished a race and he sort of struggled to get out of the car, but I saw that with Ayrton. So even those races where he did, 19 qualifying laps or whatever, he still bounced out of the car. And all the time I'd be on the radio to him, be like you and I having this conversation. There was no impression of breathlessness or fatigue. He would be on top of it. And I think that was one of the things that was his strength. He wasn't fatigued, he wasn't stressed, so he could be thinking about things. So many examples. He was winning a race somewhere, and he came on the radio and said, I've just done the fastest lap. You haven't shown me on the board. Because it was pit board and radio, much more so in those days. We said, no, you haven't. He said, yes, I have. I've just seen it on the TV by corner. We thought, what's he going on about? And then we realised it was his brother, and it had Schumacher fastest lap, and he'd caught it as he was driving past Schumacher fastest lap, and but he hadn't quite seen it was our Schumacher, not M. Schumacher. And we said, no, it's your brother. But there he was leading a Grand Prix, just having to sort of... So he just had this spare capacity that not many other drivers had. And most other drivers, they'd be breathless, they'd be having to give everything they had to do the job. He just seemed to have extra spare capacity beyond what he was doing in the car.
Was he the most complete driver that you ever worked with?
For me, yes. Yeah, I mean, I didn't work with Ayrton, I didn't work with Alain Prost or some of those other guys, but for me, he was. Yeah. I think drivers are different. I mean, I've been fascinated by Lewis and the approach he's taken. I mean, he's doing a tremendous job, amazing job, but almost a different approach to Michael. I mean, Michael would put in all the commitment and then go away quietly with the family and sort of chill out. And Lewis likes to, I wouldn't say party because that's not the right description, but he likes to do different things that keep him in the high profile and in the limelight. Michael was the opposite. He wanted to get away from all of that. So different strokes for different folks. And but I have to say, didn't work with Lewis that long. But for me, the most complete driver was Michael. And I think it's because he was setting new standards in his period. As I say, someone like Lewis, their level of preparation, their level of commitment, etc., they saw the Michael Schumacher, the era. They saw what was needed, and they found this new reference point that didn't exist before.
Well, Ross, I think that's a lovely place to end it. Thank you very much. Great to talk about Michael.
Yeah, no, very fond memories.
Thank you
Cheers.
very much.
Thanks.
So many great insights into the champ there. Michael's unbelievable work ethic is something that shines through, as well as his commitment to winning. Young drivers, take note. It goes without saying that he raised the bar in terms of what's expected of a racing driver, and that's quite some legacy. Thank you, Ross, for being so open. That was a fascinating chat. And we're not done with commemorating Michael Schumacher's 50th birthday just yet, because we have another Schumacher exclusive next week with another very special guest. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And to ensure you don't, make sure you've subscribed to Beyond the Grid. And we'd love to know your thoughts on what Ross Brawn had to say, so please get in touch using the hashtag F1BeyondTheGrid, or you can tweet me at TomClarksonF1. And don't forget, you can find lots more Schumacher content all week on Formula1.com and F1's social channels. There are videos, articles, and much, much more. Beyond the Grid is produced by F1 in association with Audioboom. Until next time, keep it flat out.